Kenneth Williams's earliest memory was of his mother singing as she cleaned the kitchen while he sat on the table. As he grew, he loved to help and copy her, following her around the house with a duster. By the age of 6, he was inventing stories and plays that he acted out with his sister and cousin, and the girls were happy to let the younger boy make the rules and be the star. They were each given one part to play, and young Kenneth would be everybody else. One portrait exists of Kenneth Williams as a baby of about 1 year old. He looks the apple of his mother's eye, as he was. Williams's father, Charlie, was at his birth in the family's 2-roomed apartment of a terraced house off the Caledonian Road in London, because Monday was early closing at the hairdresser's shop where he worked. This was Charlie's first child. It was his wife Louisa's second. Her first child, a daughter, Pat, was illegitimate, and Louis's deepest shame was kept all her life. Neither of her children ever knew that Alice Patricia was born in the workhouse. Kenneth Williams remembered his father as a God-fearing man, sceptical and puritanical, a whitewashed wall Methodist who endlessly told me, "God can see you if nobody else can." The first verses he ever learned to recite were his prayers, and all his life Williams was grateful for the exacting Christianity that was rubbed into the grain of his soul. Williams gained a scholarship to Parliament Hill Secondary, a school for academically able pupils. His parents decided the cost of the uniform and books was prohibitive and sent him to Lyell Stanley Central School for Boys in Mornington Crescent. Throughout his life, Williams tried to compensate for his inadequate education. It was at school that Williams developed his talent as a mimic. His best subjects were art and English, where he enjoyed reading aloud, and caught the infection of romantic poetry which has never left me. His first memory of performing Shakespeare was in class, standing up to give Antony's speech in Julius Caesar. "Friends, Romans, countrymen." He felt later that he grasped the meaning and the power of it instinctively, without having to analyse, and the sensation intoxicated him.
I had aspirations about the theatre, even as a child. I used to think it would be marvellous to act. I was in school plays, and very precocious and rather rude, and there were several occasions when the teacher came to my father and said, "You must tell him to stop, I suppose queening it all over the place and telling other people what to do." And my old man used to say, "You do what you're told, you understand me?"
Williams's art teacher suggested the boy could train as a draftsman. There was a school of lithography, Bolt Court, in Fleet Street, and there in 1940 Kenneth Williams was enrolled to train. He would learn lettering and perspective, the first step in preparing stone and metal plates for lithographic printing. The Luftwaffe now began bombing London nightly, and the younger pupils at Bolt Court were evacuated from the city to Oxfordshire for a year. Back in London, Christmas was a subdued affair, almost melancholy and brushed over with false gaiety, Williams wrote in the first diary entry he ever made. The pocketbook, a Collins Emerald diary, was probably a Christmas present. He carefully filled in the page of personal memoranda. Weight, 7 stone 2. Height, 5 feet 3 inches. Collar size, 14. Boots, 6.5. Plus his phone number, bicycle number, and ID card number. In March 1942, he got a job at Stanford's, a map-making firm in Long Acre. His first fortnight's wages, paid on the 10th of April, were 18 shillings and sixpence. His lettering became more confident as he discovered that left-handedness was an advantage when he was writing in reverse on stones for flatbed printing. Convinced he had talent as an actor, he joined the Tavistock Players' Little Theatre. His natural gift was for ad-libs, and when half of his false moustache fell off in a production, he got a laugh by turning away and bending over as he stuck it back on. "The stage is for Nancy's," said his father. Charlie expected his son to grow up and learn a trade. Williams defied his father by answering back, or not answering at all. When he did talk, he would provoke Charlie into a rage by affecting an upper-class accent. It was a voice he had assumed before he was a teenager, so distinctive that old classmates would recognise it decades later on the radio. By 1943, conscription was looming. The older draftsman at Stanford's suggested he could be a hydrographer on a survey ship, working on navigation charts. Williams liked the idea of a full seaman's uniform, But when his call-up came in February 1944, he was handed a rifle, a bayonet, and infantry fatigues. Williams's war service was the greatest adventure of his life. By May 1946, aged 20, he was stationed in Ceylon. Left in charge of the camp one afternoon, Williams accused a contingent of Indian troops crowded around the wireless set of trespassing in British quarters. He discovered he had caused real offence to the Subadar, the Indian officer. Williams made a performance of his apology, delivering a speech in front of the whole camp. "Subadar Sahib, I behaved in a stupid and discourteous manner. I hope you will overlook this unhappy business and accept my sincere apologies." The officer embraced him. The soldiers cheered him. That series of events, offence, humiliation, apology, absolution, became a sequence that Williams sought to repeat throughout his life. He seemed to need to behave in a way that provoked outrage and to feel belated disgust at himself, so that he could make a formal and self-abasing declaration of his sins and hope to feel purified. In August 1946, Williams joined the Combined Services Entertainment Unit in Singapore. He began to develop his instinct for comedy, and during the heavy days and humid evenings, he worked up impressions of Betty Davis, Nellie Wallace, and Winston Churchill.
I was always doing Winston Churchill. I thought I was marvellous at Winston Churchill. I was always going, "We shall fight on the battlefield, on the landing ground, and in the air. We shall never surrender." I thought I was marvellous at that. Of course, all I was really doing was giving an impression. It wasn't really any good.
Among the troupe were Peter Nichols and Stanley Baxter, who was to be a friend for the rest of his life. Stanley Baxter has felt too protective of Williams to speak about him until now. On New Year's Day, 1947, he was moved into Williams's two-man dorm. "Kenneth fascinated me," he said. "He was such an incredible character. I realized he was going places. Whether to jail or to fame, I couldn't predict, but he was certainly way out on a limb, unlike anybody I'd ever met before." By spring 1947, Williams was beginning to think of a career on stage. The success of his impersonations, the applause out front and the praise backstage were all thrilling to him. He arrived back in London in December 1947, and the new diary for 1948 was an A5 Let's with a hardboard cover and 30 lines for every day. Even when nothing significant was happening, he was cramming every page. He went back to his old job at the mapmakers and started hammering out letters to influential theatre figures such as Alan Dent, Basil Dean, and Peter Coates. But Williams was miserable, uncertain that he could succeed in the theatre, brooding on depression, failure, and thoughts of suicide. His journal entries foreshadowed the tone of his diary in the days before his death, exactly 40 years later. "Oh, what the hell? What's the good?" he concluded on the 3rd of April. "What's the bloody use of it all?" In desperation, he looked for encouragement to his horoscope. "According to the stars, mine, Pisces, Tuesday will see the reward of much hard work. I am to expect fortunate news." The stars were improbably right. Tuesday brought inquiries from the Newquay Repertory Company.
And I got a job there as ASM, small parts, painting the scenery, prompting, doing everything like that. And great fun it was when you look back on it. At the time you think, learning parts every week, painting scenery and all that, you think, what hell?
To raise some capital, he sold his stamp collection for £6 and 10 shillings and caught the Riviera Express from Paddington on the 29th of April. The local paper praised his performances as well cast and worth watching. During the run, he made the most earnest attempt of his life to fall in love with a girl. Her name was Sonia Murray, the assistant stage manager. He had a powerful motive. His father already harboured a homophobic disgust for the theatre. If he became convinced his son was gay, he might order him to quit the stage, or disown him, or worse, make Louis disown him. Williams was strongly conventional and believed promiscuous sex, homosexual or not, was sinful. He wanted his parents to see that he was leading a good and moral life, which meant that he needed to emulate them. When a new director arrived and took an immediate interest in Sonia, Williams sideslipped into a sexually neutral role as the third person in a couple. He could flirt without risk and dominate without having to take the lead. It was a pattern he repeated 2 decades later in the most successful relationship of his life. By the beginning of the following year, 1950, he was out of work, looking for purpose in his life. There was a cruel disappointment in November 1952 when his new agent, Peter Eade, arranged an audition with the Royal Shakespeare Theatre. The audition was a failure, and Williams nursed one of the deepest wounds of his career, one which intensified his doubts and barred his way in serious theatre. If he had joined the RSC in 1952, he would have been directed by Anthony Quayle, learning from Ralph Richardson and Michael Hordern in The Tempest, Macbeth and Volpone. Back in London, he began rehearsals with Donald Woolford, so unutterably common, terrible man, such a vulgarian, in King John for television, but quit the same day when he was offered the lead in another TV play as the angel in H.G. Wells's The Wonderful Visit. Full of hope, he threw a party for about 20 friends in his parents' house, which went on until the small hours. Charles and Louis threw themselves into the occasion, generous and welcoming to everyone, and Williams felt a rush of love for them. A success entirely due to their own particular brilliance as hosts. Everyone loves them. I know they're a wonderful couple of terribly human and lovable people. After the live broadcast, Williams was unemployed again. Unable to bear inactivity, he threw himself into redecorating the family home at 57 Marchmont Street. He launched himself at his mother's bedroom and the staircase, laying 25 yards of stair carpet, pasting up pink wallpaper, and painting the woodwork. He began to develop as a writer. He wrote poetry, and he tried in a one-act playlet to recreate the post-war atmosphere of bickering at his parents' home. The voices were recreated with mechanical precision. In his mimicry, Kenneth Williams was as accurate with a pen as he was at a microphone. He agreed to a short season at Birmingham Rep, which was staging Shakespeare's Henry VI trilogy. The run transferred to the Old Vic in London, where Williams was welcomed by Sybil and Richard Boulton with a celebratory supper at their house in Hampstead. Boulton and Claire Bloom were headlining the Old Vic's new season, with Rachel Roberts also in the company. Finally, he was part of a company of great actors. Here was the opportunity that would free him from drudgery in Rep, where a discerning public, including the leading critics and impresarios, would have 12 months to absorb and admire the breadth of his talents. 1 week later, he told the producers that he didn't want to be tied down to minor parts for a year, and walked out. He seemed honestly unaware that he had recently turned his back on a year's stage work with the best company in England.